This comes from a book that I'm reading, which at some point in the future I'll probably talk more about. I'm only about 40 or 50 pages into this book, but it's been a phenomenal book so far. It's called Transubstantiation by Dr. Brett Salkeld. Salkeld, I think is how you say his name. Not really sure. He is kind of tracking in this book, the theology, the history of the idea, the theological idea of transubstantiation, kind of from an ecumenical perspective, which is really interesting. He's Catholic, but he's kind of viewing like what kind of ecumenical progress has been made. So it's a really fascinating book, and I've learned a lot already about transubstantiation. But there's one part in there where he starts to talk about God as being kind of what it means to be, right? If you think about when Moses is in front of he's in the presence of the burning bush, and God in the burning bush is telling him to go to Pharaoh and tell him to let my people go. And Moses says, well, if the people ask, who sent you, what should I say? What's your name? And God says, tell them I am sent you. I am, to be, okay? Ultimate being, ultimate objective reality, what it means to exist. Okay, God is saying that I am the thing that exists. All existence is contingent on my existence. Okay? And that's what it means to be. Okay, I am who I am. All right, so kind of with that idea, this is what Dr. Salkeld writes. Quote, were God a being in or alongside of the universe, one of the natures in the world, God could not become a creature without ceasing to be God or compromising the ontological integrity of the creature he becomes. So that's actually a quote from Robert Barron. He continues. This is Salkeld now. In fact, Christian teaching is not simply that Jesus was fully human, but even that he was more fully human than the rest of us. Far from limiting his humanity, his divinity perfects it. It's a beautiful quotation. The reason why I think it gets at the heart of so much of what it means to live as a Christian is that if God is ultimate existence, he is what it means to be. All existence is contingent on his existence. That means that when God, and that's the only way that God could become a creature without also ceasing to be God, because the creation itself is already dependent on his own existence. And so if he were something else, okay, and it's not to say he's the same thing as his creation, but rather that the creation is contingent on his existence, okay, so if his existence was separate from the existence of all of creation, then if God were to become this creation, then either he would cease to be God, because he'd be stepping outside of this existence into this existence, or the existence of creation, okay, the ontology, or the being, the essence of creation would be changed, okay, would be compromised. Because you've got this thing that exists and this thing that exists, and this thing is coming over and is either taking this thing over and changing it completely, or this thing has to change in the process. So either God has to change or humanity has to change. And what we see in the incarnation is a mystery beyond mysteries, is that because the creation is already contingent on the existence of God, it exists because God exists, okay? That means that God can become human and not change the substance of humanity and not cease to be God. It's a profound thought. And the idea that in that process, that Jesus didn't just come and was human, was a form of human, but he was the fullest human. He was what it meant to be human. He was human in all its fullness. And so, going back to what it means to, we were just talking about children and living according to the first kind of precept of God's creation, he says, be fruitful and multiply. That when we do that, and when we live lives of selfless, sacrificial love that is embodied, that is lived out and demonstrated to all of us with Christ on the cross, when we do that, when we live that way, we are becoming more human. We are living more true to ourselves. Okay, there's this idea in our modern world that we look to ourselves to figure out who we really are. If we look down deep enough, we'll figure out who we really are, and as a result, we'll be fulfilled. Okay, that's not what we do. That's not what Christians ought to do. We are to look to Jesus, to his example, to who he was, to his love, okay, and the love that is present and ever present in this Trinitarian God. And we are to, and as we embody that, as we live in that, we become more of who we are meant to be. So it's more fulfilling. It's outside of ourselves, and in in almost every way, it's meant we have to die to our old selves, those selves that weren't really us, those selves that weren't who we were meant to be. We have to die to that self, the flesh, the sinful self, and in the process, we become who we were really meant to be. We become more fully human. And the only reason that's possible is because Christ came incarnate as a full human and full God. Okay, fully human, fully God. It's an amazing idea, all kind of, again, dependent on this idea that God is ultimate existence and that everything else that exists contingently according to God's existence.